All right, third time's charm. We are going live with Rene. We are going to talk about creativity and living from the senses. So I'm going to wait for Rene to get here first, and then I'm going to invite her and see what happens. Maybe that will work. Because before I was not having luck with getting her on here. Let's see. There she is. All right, let's see. There you are.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh
That
my
was
goodness.
weird.
I don't know what that was all about. I kept getting errors. Okay, hi. You're cute.
Hi.
You're in the car and it's raining and it's dark.
Yes, so I'm working out of the house this evening because Noah is at his therapy. So this is what I do like 2 or 3 times a week is I go to Barnes and Noble and work while he's at therapy.
Oh, so okay. So you're sitting in the car instead of in Barnes and Noble.
Yeah, because it was noisy. Like usually it's pretty quiet in there, but there were a lot of blenders going, so I decided to sit in the car instead.
Hello. Okay, well that's very sensually invigorating to see the wet rain and the dark behind you and
Very Washington weather, that's for sure.
okay, so speaking of sensual senses, the five senses, the six senses.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually got inspired to do this topic because of the post that I posted today, which is a quote about nature and the senses, and about not conceptualizing nature, but actually directly experiencing it. Um, and I think that's such an important principle to remember, especially when we're talking about creativity.
Okay.
I'm getting an echo real quick. Are you hearing that?
I hear a little bit of an echo, but hell, if I know what to do about it.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, so I think, in the modern world, we're very overstimulated. Like what I'm doing tonight is a great example. Like I'm in a bookstore and then I'm sitting in my car. I'm driving, I'm dropping off, I'm picking up. Um, and all along, all in that time period, I don't have a lot of opportunity for sensual engagement with what I'm doing. I mean, I can, right? Like I have to be very conscious if I want to say, okay, I'm going to feel this fake leather on my steering wheel, or I'm going to feel the fabric of this seat that I'm sitting on, or I'm going to be in the coffee shop and just smell the aromas or whatever.
Yeah.
But how much are we actually engaging with the senses usually? It's usually very little. Like when you're driving, there's a lot going on in the mind and of course the spinal cord. If you've been driving your whole life, it's hardwired in there. But the awareness has to be what I call like lateral awareness, and maybe we've talked about that before. um, but when you have lateral awareness, like the planning awareness, the kind of like the surveyor's kind of awareness, you can't have direct sensual experiential awareness.
Okay.
And that's just because they're different kinds of interacting in the world, right? Um, but I think we in modern life we're in that lateral awareness so often. Managing things at work, managing the kids, managing schedules, and so we're not able to really be upfront in our senses.
Right.
Um,
Well, and
I mean,
I think in my little club, I would call that, left brain, right brain. That we're all,
totally.
operating from the left brain, which is the do, right? And we have to really open up and connect to our deeper self if we're going to engage the right brain and really go to Barnes and Noble and smell the smells and listen to the sounds and feel the vinyl seats or whatever and really engage. It's
Yeah.
still a choice, but originally when we got on the call, you brought up nature, so I'd like to talk about the difference, because you can be in nature as well and be in your left brain, right? and not
Totally.
be fully present in nature and in all her glory. So
Right.
it's definitely a practice, and it can be anywhere. Like I do, it is very interesting though that tonight you're in the dark, wet rain in the car, you know,
Mhm.
kind of shrouded or, you know, protected from the elements, right?
Yes. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and that, for practical reasons, that's, what we do often. I think the use of the word nature, um, it's interesting because there's kind of this false idea that there's nature and then there's here I am in a mall parking lot, right? Like, but actually I'm still in nature. Like nature is whatever's going on around us. And so yeah, there's still rain, there's still air, there's still my molecules and my cells and the vibrations in my body and the interactions that I'm having with other people as I, say hi to the barista or whatever. Um, and so that dichotomy, I think, also is a left brain thing where we say, hey, we're not in nature right now, let's go to nature. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um,
Well, we're in our
but
natural habitat. What is
right,
our
yeah,
natural habitat? Inside a car, protected from the rain, inside Barnes and Noble, or inside the house, or whatever.
right, yeah, yeah. And so going back to what you said, I think the really important thing isn't like being in your right brain is if you're conscious of the fact that you're in your right brain, you're in your left brain, right? Like, wouldn't you say?
I love that.
Like, if you're really fully, completely in your right brain, there's not any mentation happening, right? There's no narrative happening. And maybe that's like of course it's on a spectrum. It's not black and white like a switch, right? There's a spectrum of like the right brain being engaged or the senses being engaged, but like full presence. There's no narrative, no observer. Um,
Right.
and I call it being upfront in your senses, sort of like as if you're like at the command center in this little spaceship that is your body, and you're right there in that big window, and there's nothing between you and what you're engaging with. And to me, that happens when not only is the mind quiet and still, but the heart is really engaged. Like you're engaged on an emotional feeling sense level with what you're experiencing.
Well, not to just jump right to the end, but we've kind of talked about the idea of making love to, life, right?
Mhm.
Several times, and you can explain that to whoever hasn't heard us talk about that because it sounds kind of weird. But
Yeah,
the best way to explain what you're saying is when you can't meta it. It's like sex. When you're having sex and you're in the middle of the deed,
right,
there's no meta, there's no
right,
narrator, and
right.
you lose yourself in the act, and that is all your
Mhm.
senses, right? It's your sense of smell, it's your sense of taste, it's your physical pleasure, it's even the sounds, of whatever, the sheets against your ears, I don't know, your
Yeah,
partner. It is very, very sensually, it's packed, and we do
exactly.
lose ourselves in that. And so I think that, obviously we talk about creativity a lot, that kind of a connection with your body is really, really healthy for your mind. So it all plays into that, connection to your deeper self on a physical level, and being in touch with what's happening around you. And I think the nth degree would be the sex act.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example that's probably relatable to most people because not all of us are like artists or peak performance athletes or musicians or something, but we've all most likely most of us have had that moment where in the act of lovemaking you've lost yourself, you've dissolved not only into the lover and you're the lover and the loved and the beloved all at once, but also the moment itself, the space, the environment, everything becomes this culmination of life, really. It's just like this, literally this concentrated, what I want to say, like a focal point of life, right, in that moment. And being embodied is such a huge part of that. And that's, that's what we lose if we're always operating from that left brain place, is that sense of embodiment. And that's really what I mean by being upfront in the senses, is we're not filtering our, like, the touch that I'm feeling or whatever. Like, I'm not filtering that through some conceptual framework in my mind that's like, this is good, this is bad, this is useful, this is not useful, this, all those categories. You're experiencing sensual engagement without the categorization, because the categorization is what creates separation.
Right. That's when we, like you said, hop on over to the left brain for a minute. We have
Exactly.
with the little toddler STV toddler club. There's new stuff out, by the way. Me and my children, we never played with anything but like sand and cornstarch and food coloring and Play-Doh. Now they have these big corn things, and they make these big swimming pools full of these big corn things for sensory. What is it called? Sensory something. I don't know.
Yeah, sensory play, sensory
Sensory
engagement.
play, yes. And they have all kinds of stuff that they never had before. But I would never expect my grandson, Achilles, or, a toddler to stop and say, isn't it interesting how I'm completely lost in this moment, feeling that I've never felt this before, and I'm going to, analyze it. Of course they don't do that.
Right.
When we are connected to our senses, it can be correlated to like a toddler, like Achilles, or somebody under 3 or 4, because before you start identifying and decoding letters and reading, life is primarily right-brained. It's emotionally charged. It's sensory. You're up to your ears and poop and snot and tears and all of it. It's very right brain. It's very sense oriented.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we move them into the logical sequential, tie your shoes and learn to read, and all of that becomes almost secondary. So, and I know it's not necessarily about being like children, but they're a perfect example of how we come out knowing how to connect on that level with the world around us, creative sense.
Yeah,
We're
I mean, I think I was going to say, I think in many ways it is about being like children while still retaining the capacity for discernment and executive function and decision making and all those things. But for instance, I was recommended a book called The Shack by a friend of mine who's Christian, and I found it as a movie. And so I watched the movie, and there's a lot of the theme, let's just like summarize it, a lot of the theme is around judgment. And so there's this main scene where the protagonist of the story, he's in this cave, and there's like this spiritual entity there who invites him and says, hey, it's time for the judgment. This is a serious thing. It's judgment time. And he's like, all right, judge me, judge away. And then she's like, no, we're not judging you, you're judging God. And so he's kind of taken aback, and then, she starts kind of like going in. So who's to blame? Who's to blame here? Is it God? Is it the sinner? Is it this murderer? Is it this, person who beats their wife? And, so posing all these kind of philosophical questions to him, moral philosophical questions. And ultimately, like, what the man realizes is that it's not God's role to judge so much as it is God's role to see that the love, like his feeling of love, his sense of love supersedes any kind of possible judgment. And so that's what Jesus's life is all about, the sacrifice, so that no one has to be judged, but that everyone can be saved, no matter who they are, whether they're a murderer, whether they're, a person who beats their wife, etc. And so this theme of judgment is really prominent in this story. And of course, it's couched in Christian language and kind of the Christian worldview. But I see it as really the same thing, because what they're illustrating is that judgment, taking on what they call the role of God, playing God, separates you from God. But allowing what they call, God to do his job, basically. When you allow God to do his job, then God is your father, and you are a child, and you have innocence, because you don't judge others, you don't judge yourself, and you're not judging your experience. So it takes this great burden off of the believer, by surrendering to the fact that they can't know from our tiny perspective, right? We can't know. We have about like a grain of sand of perspective in a universe of, grains, right? Like infinite grains. So that really spoke to me, that metaphor for the fact that we are really meant to be the children of the universe, the children of nature, the children of that higher power. We're not meant to be playing God. And when we do that, we lose our innocence. And there was another great metaphor for this in C.S. Lewis's sci-fi trilogy. So just to really quickly like explain it, it's a sci-fi trilogy. They're on Venus, and Venus is basically like Eden, and the Queen of Venus is like a very Eve-like figure, very innocent. She's not aware of herself, and the devil tempts her by showing her a mirror and saying, this is what's so great about man, is that we can live alongside ourselves and look at ourselves and apprehend ourselves and be together with ourselves in a conceptual way. And she's like really confused and scared, and she's like, it's me, but it's not me, because it's the concept you, right? It's the false self. So just another metaphor for that, that I find really, really moving. When we lose that childlike innocence, we become the judge. And being the judge is not a fun thing to do. It's not what we're supposed to do, right? And it takes away our creative instinct, our creative drive.
Right. Well, good for you for being able to see through all the Christianese and find something palpable that you can relate to, as far as the source being the God, or, the source being the God energy, the father who loves the child. That's a beautiful, beautiful relationship. And it's a good metaphor. But I think that, when you think of sin, I think they say sin is missing the mark. And that atonement, which is what Jesus came to accomplish, to atone for our sins. So when we miss the mark, we need atonement. And this child of God, this son of God, is giving us that atonement. And a way to stretch that to what you're trying to say, I think, is, you often say dissolution, but I want to say, you also often say dissolvement. But what's the word I was thinking of? When you break with your own self and you disintegrate, it's not the dissolution that you say. It's not the dissolution that you often talk about in your deep spiritual moments. It's a disintegration. So our integrity and our integration with our deeper soul is going to be sinless. We're not going to miss the mark. We're going to be sinless, because our atonement is when we're at one-ment with our own deeper selves. And include the source or the father or whatever, the higher power, whatever you want. But that when we're harsh with ourselves, which comes from your self-care course too, when you're harsh with yourself and you're judging yourself and you're separating yourself, sin separates us from God. So that judgment separates us from ourselves, because it's not rooted in love. And so if we want atonement at one minute deeper selves with our true selves, and we don't want to have sin separate us from that wholeness, then we're going to not be so judgy. We're not going to be so analytical. We're going to do less and
Exactly. Exactly. I couldn't put it better. I always thought there's this word in Sanskrit, and it's anavamala, and what it means is root impurity. So mala is root, like the mala bead. There's always that root bead on a mala strand, right? They call it the guru bead. So root impurity. And to me, that's the closest thing to original sin that Indian philosophy has, is this anavamala. And it's not anything that's wrong with us, that we're evil, that we're selfish, that we make bad choices. It's just simply that we carry around with us the illusion of separation, because we've forgotten that we're not a self-contained discrete entity. We're actually a part of the whole. And so that, to me, is the closest thing that really kind of contextualizes original sin for me in a way that really makes sense to me. Is exactly what you're saying, is that the illusion that we're separate, and therefore we have to assess everything we come in contact with to determine, is it good for me, is it bad for me, will it help me, will it hurt me, because it's just not about that.
I like that.
Yeah,
I do. I like that too. And part of the whole meditation craze, the current obsession, trying to figure out how to meditate, especially during COVID. People are desperate for some kind of connection, right? And so I don't know, I've probably downloaded 5 or 6 new meditation guru things. I
Mhm.
feel like it's coming out of the woodwork. And part of that obsession is to try and find some kind of inner harmony. And
Right.
I think that we all just needed to be mindful. And at the beginning of COVID, there was that little meme going around about everybody sitting down and relaxing and being creative again and brushing here and
Mhm.
brushing there. And then the metaphor of like the Odysseus, the male going out into the world to conquer. Well, guess what? All the men have to stay the fuck home again now. And so they have to go on their,
Right.
so their journey now is to go within as well. So the whole world is going within, and we were
Mhm.
supposed to come out with this beautiful gem uh, of this, our internal realm, bringing it out to, embrace the external. And I don't know what happened. There was, I guess I felt like a little Pollyanna when I thought, oh, this is going to be so great for society. And whew, we got more divided politically and now
Yeah.
medically. And so it's the whole creativity message that we are one. There's nothing isolated. We are united. And if we can live in that and know that, consciously and unconsciously, I don't think that we would have as much stress fighting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I have shared your similar, like that similar feeling of the Pollyannism, I call it. And I really believe that many people are going to use this opportunity as a vehicle. And I used to think everything had to happen collectively for it to be, as a child, like, oh, the whole world's going to get enlightened one day. And, now I'm like, okay, like there's going to be people who walk this path and there's going to be people who walk this path of awareness and use that opportunity. And so I don't feel exactly the same way as you in the sense that I think it was a missed opportunity. I think it's still there. And I think
I hope you're right. I hate the feeling of disappointment from being an older woman. I just hate it. So I
yeah,
will latch on to whatever perspective you are expressing right now, and I will hold out. I will. I promise I will. I'd rather do that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think even though things are in some places feeling like they're moving towards going back toward normal, I still think there was a collective pause that helped us really look at basically what we're talking about, sensual living.
Hmm.
Like, what do we actually want to be doing with our time? Where do we actually want to be showing up? You know, with our family, sitting around a table, sharing meals,
Hmm.
being in the moment, having being in nature. That really became a big thing, right? Like people finding
Yeah.
places to be out in nature, right? Because you couldn't go anywhere else, but you needed somewhere where you could feel connected. And why is it that we go out? Why do we go distract ourselves? We want to feel at least some semblance of connection when, when our minds and our bodies are used to running at such a high cadence that we need like extra stimulation to feel like we're alive. And now people can go sit in nature and they're finding that they have that connection already available to them in this very like unmarketable, unprofitable, way,
Right.
right?
Right. It's free. Sex is free too. Oh, wow. I'll
Yeah,
have to
totally.
look up. Yeah. 6 feet, 6 feet apart. I just think that we didn't get into we didn't get really into the different senses with the smell, the sight, the touch, the feel,
Yeah,
um, and all of the things that I love about being a human. Because sometimes I don't like being so lofty, and I don't like being so theoretical and talking so much about, just theories and brain science and all of that. I really, really love I just love the human part of being human. I,
yeah, and I think that's a great point. One, because I am very heady and I'll get in my head and I'll go down that route, especially when you and I talk because it's a lot of fun. And so with that, I would love actually maybe, next week we can do this. We can do the get in the senses meditation um, exercise. Like we can go through each sense and really show up with each sense. And would you be up for doing that next week?
sure. You mean do an actual meditation?
Yeah, like so I'd be happy to lead that. We could do it on Instagram Live. And yeah, and just invite anyone who wants to join to come and do that with us and go through each sense, really engage with each sense. So it's not a meditation in the sense of you're shutting your eyes and you're going within, but you're actually showing up to touch, taste, smell. You know, you're really showing up to the senses and to whatever it is you're experiencing outside of yourself.
Yeah, I would love that. And I would love that. So we can do that next week. And I mean, I'll just go along with it. I won't join in. I'll join in quietly.
Okay, well, and then, you know, if you want to chat afterwards, like I would love, you know, to get your perspective. What was your experience like, you know,
Sure.
and how maybe like the things you do in your own practices, your own singing practice, teaching, and et cetera, have that same effect for you because it isn't specialized, right? I think that's the big thing I want people to understand is like, sure, I can guide you through it, but you have five senses and you know how to use them, right? So we can all find ways that resonate with us and speak to us and not and furthermore actually move our hearts, engage the heart and not just the senses in a mechanical hedonistic way, but actually the heart so that we're cultivating love at the same time.
I love appreciation and gratitude because
Yeah.
if especially people that get COVID and can't smell a damn thing, right? You never
Yeah,
realize you loved that you were able to smell stuff till you lose it.
totally.
So many
Totally.
about that. And I love the meditation that we did in your course about the space and the mass and the volume.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely do that because that has to do with touch in a sense. Yeah. But
Yeah, absolutely. So in Ayurveda, they teach that if space element, there's the five elements, if space element in the body, in the self, in the mind, is rectified, all the other elements fall into place because space element holds the other elements. It's sort of like the canvas or the, you know, the, you know, I don't know, like the base of all the others, right?
I like the canvas. Okay, then I don't know what time it is because I can't. Let's see. But
Looks like 5:45.
we are just right on the button. I'm so sorry about whatever the rejection thing was. You're so cute how you just sit there and wait for me so patiently. You're so good
No,
with tech.
it's okay. Technology. I mean, what are you gonna do? You know, it's another practice in just like, okay, this is what's happening. You know, accept,
We'll do next week, and we will culminate our 2021 Instagram live sessions with a beautiful meditation of the five
Perfect.
senses and a celebration of being human, because this is that season of celebrating an infant to baby human. And then we will break for 2022, and we'll join back
Wow.
maybe the 10th or 10th. So,
Perfect.
okay, all right.
Look at Renee. She's so on top of it. I love it.
Lovely as always, my dear. Mwah.
Me
Bye.
too. Mwah.
Good night. Love you.
Love you too.